So starting now, and we will have the recordings available afterwards. So if anyone you know wanted to attend and couldn't, I will send out that link. Again, just so grateful to have you all here with us tonight. We'll be meeting at the same Zoom link every Tuesday, 6 p.m. through October 13th. So our topic for today is trauma in our community now. So I would like to introduce our speakers and panelists for tonight. We have Becky Zakowski. She is the coordinator of SJC Cares, our system of care organization in St. Joe County. In this role, she convenes local organizations and individuals who provide services and programs to enhance the mental and emotional well-being of youth and families in St. Joseph County, with the goal of the best possible experiences for families when they seek support for their children. And we also have Kimberly Reeves. Kimberly has been with Beacon Health System, which is Memorial Hospital, since 2012. As the Director of Community Impact, she provides oversight for outreach of 3 hospitals in our Michiana area, Elkhart, Marshall, and St. Joseph counties. She is responsible for ensuring there are effective and sustainable models and processes in place to improve the health of our communities through measurable and effective behavior changes that will ultimately impact the quality of life of community members. We also have a fabulous panel tonight, and our panel consists of Cindy Limp, who is a trauma social worker at Beacon Health System. Kim Neff is Director of St. Joseph County Child and Adolescent Clinical Services at Oaklawn Psychiatric Center. Robin Vita is the Director of Health Outreach, Promotion, and Education for the St. Joseph County Department of Health. And Stephanie Stewart-Bridges is Student Services Coordinator for South Bend Community School Corporation. So thank you all, and I will turn it over now to Becky for some trauma definitions to get us started.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So as Sarah said, I coordinate SJC Cares, which is our system of care organization in St. Joe County. And with what I'm an expert on nothing. However, one of the great things is I get to be around really great people in our community all of the time. That's kind of part of the job, is convening. So, and you're going to meet, as Sarah introduced, a lot of great people tonight, if you haven't met them already, who are kind of engaged in this work. And so, what we want to talk about tonight, as Sarah said, a little bit about kind of just trauma in the community. And now that we know about trauma, like, gosh, and what we're learning about trauma, what can we do? And, you know, kind of sometimes you hear about this, we know better, so then we do better. Yes. And that part of that is an individual thing, but part of that too are organizations. What can our organizations do to make sure that we're being effective with people who have been impacted by trauma? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Kind of creating that change, it's a progression, and it's not something that happens really easily. And there's kind of a lot of reasons for that, but we're talking about collaborations, we're talking about people, and getting everybody on the same page. So one reason for that kind of has to do with definitions. And so to get started, if you don't mind, I just want you to think for a minute. When you hear the term trauma, what comes to mind? And now, because we get to meet over with the fun of Zoom, the wonders of technology, if you would just kind of, if you don't mind, as you feel comfortable, share your thought. When you hear trauma, what comes to mind? If you'd share that in the chat, that would be great. So we're starting to see some definition, or I guess I didn't really ask you to define, but kind of first thoughts with trauma. We're seeing a range of things. You see abuse, life-altering, a negative impact or negative event that impacts you throughout life. Abuse, neglect, PTSD, wartime, pain. Something bad happened, devastating experiences, negative and high impact. And then, okay, I appreciate this quote, and this factors into kind of what we're saying. My son's a paramedic, and we're aware of a lot of trauma in our community. So I am going to attempt, I am like the world's worst screen sharer, but just want to share, oh boy, how do I do it? Okay, a little, I don't see it anywhere.
Green button, share screen, yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to share screen, but when I look at my screen, I don't see what I pulled up. I don't see my presentation. Oh man. Okay, hold on.
Let me know. I can pull it up too, I think, if it's the slides you sent me.
Okay, tell me what you see right now. I'm always impatient with this too. What do you see right now? Am I sharing?
Mm-mm.
Well, it helps. Say share. Okay, hold on. Try again.
I see you, Becky.
Oh, well, I'm sorry.
There we go.
There she goes.
Okay, do you see the, I don't see the presentation, so sorry. Bear with me here.
It says started. Okay, here it comes up. Yep.
Okay.
Got it now.
My screen is dark.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't see what I'm sharing. Oh, it is. Okay.
It is dark, yeah.
Okay. So I apologize.
Oh, there it is. Now we see it. It was just in the back.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Okay, so now, let's see. All right. Okay, so you don't need the title slide. Trauma, what comes to mind? You've shared that. And like, when we look at definitions, there's a range of different definitions. And so Dr. Bessel Van der Kolk, I didn't find this in the book. I found this with an interview he did in 2015. So the author of the book that's brought us together defined it this way. Trauma is something that overwhelms your coping capacities and confronts you with the thought, oh my God, it's all over and there's nothing I can do. I'm done for. Okay, so that is one way to look at trauma, and kind of somebody who's in the work and worked with a lot of people, that's his definition. We look to SAMHSA, they define it, of course, a little bit more academically. They're not saying, putting, you know, what somebody says in there, but what SAMHSA, our Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, kind of a governmental agency, defines it as individual trauma results from an event, a series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. Another thing that SAMHSA, they classify is there's an event, and it's the experience of that event and the effect it has. And one thing notable about that is people may experience trauma differently too. So two people could go through the same event. It could have a different, they might experience it differently, and it could have a different effect on them. So there's a lot of variables with trauma. But, and we learned, this came up in the reading about the ACE study. So in chapter 9 specifically in The Body Keeps a Score, Dr. Van der Kolk mentions the ACE study, which stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And one of the things they say in there is a conclusion is that child abuse is our nation's largest public health problem. Some of the takeaways from that are that trauma is common, very common, much more common than they expected it to be when they started the ACE survey. The effects of trauma are not outgrown, and the impacts of trauma in childhood pervade adult lives, both physically and emotionally. So what do we do? Great question. So when we look at kind of how organizations can come together and collaborate, one thing that we've kind of realized, and again, not that SJC Cares has been at every meeting, but as somebody who's participated and worked with people who are very interested in helping our community kind of move that needle and be a responsive place where people who've experienced trauma can experience healing in their community, one thing we realized after a while is, wow, it's just even important that we all get on the same page with the language, because sometimes the language is different. And there are kind of different, differing definitions. But if you looked at what it takes to become trauma informed, there's kind of some steps. And so phase 1 is trauma awareness. And so that is something that we're probably all experiencing. If reading this book was an introduction to trauma for you, you could now describe yourself as being trauma aware. Recognize a recognition and the realization of what trauma is and how it impacts people. Okay, so knowing about trauma doesn't mean that if an organization trains all of their staff and they learn about trauma, if they're not doing things differently, that doesn't mean that they are trauma informed. Okay, phase 2 is trauma sensitive. And sometimes this is defined as where the transformation really happens. So once people learn about trauma, transformation happens and they start to view people and their adaptations through a stress and trauma lens. So again, sometimes the classic way of looking at that, we hear a lot about that, and this material is not what's wrong with you, but gosh, what happened to you? Or sometimes if you see, again, behavior with somebody that just seems not like regular, normal, socially acceptable behavior, realizing, wow, there could be more to this. It might just be, there might be something driving that behavior that the person is doing. Phase 3 is trauma responsive. And so when we get into these definitions, a lot of times we are thinking about organizations, but organizations go through phase 1 and phase 2 as well. Phase 3 means that the principles of safety for people, trust, choice, collaboration, and empowerment are supported throughout the organization, and planning for policy, practice, and environment. There's planning taking place for policy changes, practice changes, and environmental changes. And then phase 4 is when an organization does realize becoming trauma informed, and that's actually when the changes to policy, practice, and environment are adapted and institutionalized. And we share this, again, to give you a little bit of context as we hear from the other presenters tonight. And the first thing we want to say, oh, I want to show you this too. So you could think of a kind of this roadmap to becoming trauma informed. Okay, so learning about trauma and recognizing it and understanding it impacts people is a really super, super important first step. You won't have the buy-in if people don't have that first step done. But again, learning is just the beginning. And we're all kind of at different phases. Different organizations in the community are in different phases too. But we do hear just a lot of interest in organizations of wanting to be able to become trauma informed so they can respond effectively. And again, have their organization be part of healing for people in our community who've experienced trauma. Okay, so now we're going to turn it over to Kimberly Reeves, who, as Sarah shared, is a director with Beacon Community Impact. And she is going to share kind of an initiative that Beacon Community Impact has taken on to really increase and impact the level of trauma awareness in our community.
Thank you, Becky. So we'll just take a few minutes to swap, and I'll share my screen now. Great. And I believe you can all see. Okay, so as Becky mentioned, Beacon understood that this was a need in our community. And what I mean by that is we identified mental health as a priority, probably now for many, many years. It started back in 2012, where we put many programs and activities together to help address the need. As a not-for-profit care organization, this is what we do to make sure that we're effective in meeting the various aspects of helping individuals either maintain or improve their quality of life. And so taking this needs assessment, mental health ended up popping up on our radar. In 2015, we continued to do some of the same work, but identified in 2016 that we actually needed to start looking at trauma differently. And so that's where we were introduced to Dr. Robert Anda through ACE Interface. ACE Interface provides education, analysis, and process design, facilitation, and products that will help you engage and motivate everyone to prevent ACEs and improving the well-being of individuals. This was important for us because it was the first intentional step that we were taking to actually understand what trauma is, the impacts of trauma, and how to mitigate the effects of trauma. And so we embarked on this, as I mentioned, in 2016. In order to do this, we identified 25 stakeholders that were a part of ACE Interface Master Training. This allowed us to put together a train-the-trainer model, if you will. And at this point, we identified individuals through an application process that were parts of the school system, community organizations, social service agencies, and so forth. And what we charged them to do at that time was to help share the findings effectively with the fidelity and to change ourselves and promote change within the spheres of influence. This was important for us because one of the things that we really need to, that we needed to really make sure that we were able to do was to make everyone aware that this wasn't something that we were going to provide without having an intentional look at ourselves in terms of what changes are we willing to make and how can we be most effective in our own circles, and then obviously how do you take that and then make sure that it gets disseminated in the community. And so this wasn't something that Beacon could do alone. We understood the value of having community stakeholders be a part of this process. So training by the numbers. In 2018, we had Dr. Anda and Laura Porter from ACE Interface come back to us and provide additional master trainer training. And so we were able total to train 50 master trainers. I will say now we have about 30 that are actively engaged. We have some that have moved away and others that have other things that are priority right now for them, but they continue to stay connected and want information, and they're able to provide the trainings when they can find the time to do so or a need arises. In order to do this, we also have 40 community partners that we're able to engage. And this is in a couple different ways. One is because Beacon provides funding to partners through a grant process, we want to make sure that they have this information, that they're aware of trauma and the effects of trauma. And so if you're funded by Beacon, part of your onboarding process, if you will, is that through that year that you're going to get at least a 2-hour training. The other is that through United Way, they're doing something very similar, where their funded partners go through a process where they're also trained on trauma-informed care. So the numbers right here with the 40 is with respect to Beacon. However, I will say that there are community partners that are doing so much more. That is also true of the system of cares that Becky may speak to a little bit later, but they too offer trainings throughout the community on a monthly basis. In total, we can say that we've trained over 1,000+ community members. And that's great because, as Becky stated before, it's very important that we initially start with the awareness. And then at that point, we can get to impact, or I should say knowledge, right? Where when somebody understands exactly what addressing trauma can do for individuals, and they understand the value of responding effectively, then we can see the change that we're hoping to see that will lead us to a self-healing community. Lessons learned. So for Beacon, what we had to learn is that Beacon also had to be trauma informed. What were we doing? It wasn't enough to say that we were going to bring Dr. Anda and Laura Porter in to provide the training and offer this to the community if we weren't going to do something ourselves, and really take an intentional look at how we were engaging with patients or engaging with clients, engaging with community members. And so something that we had to take a look at and kind of back up and reassess where we were was initially understanding what role do we play in becoming a trauma-informed organization. And I will say that although we started this work in 2016, yes, it is 2020, and it is something that we continue to work on, but I'm happy to report that we make progress, that we've made progress over time, and will continue to do so. The other is that our role is to be supportive. Oftentimes, what we wanted to do, because we're in community health and we want to see the change and improved health in the community, is that we just want to provide the service without taking into consideration that we may have not gone through what someone else has gone through, experienced what they've experienced. Us, for individuals who have been traumatized, we also need to understand how we may overtly or, yes, overtly create an atmosphere that will traumatize someone. And so we really had to make sure that we were doing this with someone. And I often say that we are not doing something to them, but with them. We just have to show up and we have to offer guidance. And that was a lesson that we had to learn. And we continue to have to remind ourselves that we are there to offer support and simply understand how we can best play a part in their recovery. And lastly, we're all in this together. This is a collaborative effort. We wouldn't be where we are today. Beacon's efforts wouldn't be where they are today if it wasn't for community partners that continue to push this effort forward. So many that are on the call today, from the health department to the school systems, to the system of cares, to the Oaklawn, to the University of Notre Dame, those are organizations that have continued to work in this area. And another thing that we often have to remember is that this is a meta leadership. This is a meta leadership type of transformation that we have to go through, and that Beacon does not own this. This isn't something that we want to continue to just do for our own benefit, but if it is truly for the benefit of the community, that we have to work together. And so with that said, I'll turn it back over to Becky, and she's going to share more about the System of Care's work.
Okay, thank you, Kimberly. Thank you.
You're welcome.
One thing I can share about this, and again, I had never even heard of ACEs until Beacon kind of brought it to the community and was able to be trained and then became a trainer. And so it really has been, oh, that's what I wanted to say, is that within our system of care, so we have about 60 local organizations that are kind of part of SJC Cares. They attend consortium meetings. And 2 years ago, we did a survey, kind of that slide I showed you earlier that showed kind of trauma awareness, trauma responsiveness, and kind of asked the participants. I think we had 34 responses. We didn't have as many attendees at that time or as many stakeholders at that time. And the responses we got, so we did a survey kind of about trauma-informed care and said they kind of self-rated themselves on the spectrum of different levels of, you know, responding to trauma. And the results came back very strongly that trauma awareness, they had really seen that their people in their organization had learned about trauma and recognized the impact of trauma. And we're really hungry to be able to do more. So again, I think that spoke a lot to how impactful the ACE interface program has been in our community. I will also mention, Kimberly mentioned that we do offer it. And so it's system of care in St. Joe County and Elkhart County. ACE interface, it is the program that Kimberly mentioned. And so we have trainees through our system of care in Oaklawn that offer that program free to the community once a month over Zoom. It's currently offered on the 4th Monday of the month at 9 in the morning. Starting in 2021, we're going to move it to the 4th Tuesday of the month, but that can be signed up on SJC Care's website under education or on the Oaklawn website under events. And I know Ready to Grow St. Joe is also offering it monthly. I don't have their website handy, but I can probably look that up in a minute. So now we're gonna switch gears a little bit and look at, kind of talk to some people who, again, are doing the work every day in our community. And we're gonna be asking a variety of questions. So as Sarah mentioned, we have Stephanie Stewart-Bridges with South Bend Community School Corporation, Kim Neff with Oaklawn, Robin Vita with the Health Department, and Cindy Lemp with Beacon and Memorial Hospital. And so all kind of leaders who are doing the work every day. We kind of have a variety of questions about this. All of them have also been active in like the ACE Interface Initiative as well. So the first question, we're going to start with Stephanie Stewart-Bridges, who is the coordinator of student services for the school corporation. And so in her role, one of the things that she does there is she oversees all the social workers in the school system. And so Stephanie, I know you're here, there you are. Okay, question, why is it important in your perspective for education professionals to learn about trauma and how to provide trauma-informed care?
It's important because when you look at the behaviors in a classroom, 9 times out of 10, people are looking at, you know, something is wrong with the child and they want to correct it in a punitive way. However, if we look at it from a trauma-informed or a trauma-responsive lens, we create an opportunity for students to develop the concept of resilience. So what we do is we are creating an environment for everyone to thrive. I think we have that early expectation that kids come to the classroom with all the skills necessary to sit down and learn, but when you have so many different things that you have to deal with in your home life, sometimes retaining information is not that number one thing, you know, on our list of things to do. When we think of our roles as adults, when we're frustrated, when we're overwhelmed, for example, at Christmas time, when you're trying to put a kid's toy together and you're reading the directions, but you're frustrated because that's not fitting together. You can't retain the right information to be able to make things work. And so how much more of that is an issue for a child in a classroom? So when we create spaces where we are developing and encouraging resilience, we're allowing students to learn at the pace that they're at, and we're really kind of shaping people, not teaching kids to pass tests, but we're creating opportunities for them to be better people for our community.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, okay, so I think you answered, I had kind of a second part of a question there, but I think you've answered that pretty well. with how it impacts kind of the student's outcome. So thank you, Stephanie. Okay, now I have a question for Kim. So Kim is with Oaklawn, and Kim, just wondering if you could share a bit about how trauma awareness and trauma sensitivity impact the work of a community mental health center like Oaklawn, and maybe anything you want to share about how Oaklawn has responded to trauma and what kind of difference this makes for the youth seen at Oaklawn. Oops, I'm sorry, you're muted.
Also ready to go. Not really. This makes me very nervous, by the way. So with regards to trauma awareness and trauma sensitivity, by the work that we have been doing as an agency, working towards being trauma informed, it has meant that we've looked at what we call the 4 R's of trauma informed care. So, you know, realizing the impact that trauma has on the individual, recognizing the signs and symptoms of trauma, so doing a lot of education within Oaklawn, but also outside of Oaklawn. You know, taking what we're learning and integrating that into our policies and procedures, how we practice, and also, as Kimberly had mentioned, you know, resisting that, recognizing and resisting that re-traumatizing the very people we're trying to help by our own reactions to the things that we might be seeing in their behavior. You know, for Oaklawn, in our journey to be trauma informed, it has meant educating staff of all roles, all positions, because you never know when you might run across somebody who has a history of trauma and we're not responding through that trauma informed lens. So that has been really important to us. And looking at, you know, integrating trauma informed care into our policies, our procedures, our practices, our processes. And so it has really changed the way that I think we look at trauma and its effect on individuals. We really also embrace a lot of the trauma-informed principles of empowerment and inviting the clients to have a voice. We have a consumer advisory board, both for adults and for transition age youth, and they meet regularly. They give us feedback so that we can continue to grow and make changes that are trauma informed and create a safe environment for the people that we serve. But also, as Kimberly also mentioned, like doing things collaboratively. You know, the traditional way of doing treatment was kind of like, you come and see me, I give you a diagnosis, I tell you what to do. And this trauma informed care has really lessened that power differential. And we're in this together. You know, we'll walk beside you in that journey. As for our response to trauma with kids, I think the ACE trainings that we have been having in this community for the last number of years has been really helpful for us in seeing trauma besides just a car accident or a one-time bully incident. That we're looking at a lot of these childhood adversities and the powerful impact that it has on brain development. And so, you know, what we find ourselves doing is doing so much education, helping families understand the impact on the brain and how the brain functions and how it goes offline. And that has been so helpful, I think, to so many families of having an understanding of that brain and how that's affecting their child or their children's behavior and changing their responses. So, you know, they're not being as reactive. And sometimes it's also tapping into the family's own trauma history. So I think the trauma-informed care, being trauma sensitive, has been really, really helpful in all the work that we're doing with kids. So I hope that answers what you were looking for.
I think so. And people, so for attendees, we'll see how we do with our time tonight. We may have some time for Q&A. If you do have questions, you can put those in the chat also for any of our panelists. But yeah, that was a very nice overview. So thank you, Kim. Okay, next question. We're up for 3. Okay, this is for Cindy. And so Cindy works as a hospital social worker, very busy hospital social worker, right? So question is, how does knowing about trauma and its effects impact the work you do as a hospital social worker? And you might want to, if you can elaborate, share some of the specific challenges of working with a traumatized population in a hospital environment.
Surely, thank you. So I want to say that I'm one of the lucky recipients of the programs that Kimberly talked about through Beacon. I've been trained through ACEs as an ACEs trainer,
as many of the people here tonight have. And then also, early on, I went through the eye movement desensitization and reprocessing training that was offered at the beginning of this initiative. And just for my nervousness, I'm just going to refer to our author as Dr. V, because I'm horrible at pronouncing names and not out of disrespect. But Dr. V even talks about mindfulness and EMDR as one of the treatments for trauma. So Beacon's been really online with their initiatives from the beginning. So I want to tell you a little bit about what it's like in my everyday work, how this knowledge has helped me. I had a mental health background before I came to Memorial. I worked at the Community Mental Health Center for 22 years before I moved over to medical. And when I left, a lot of people asked me, why are you doing that? You've always worked in mental health. And I think the thing that I said to them is we are all physical and psychological beings at the same time. And so I'm not leaving mental health. I'm doing that work in a different location. And so these tools, the ACEs training and the EMDR training has really helped me in my work here. So first of all, what it's taught me and in my approach with clients is that I have learned to listen more than I talk. And I think sometimes we feel like as people in the helping profession that we should know everything, that we should educate, that we should talk. And really what people need from us is listening. Listening allows people to tell their story. I was talking to Becky earlier today and I said the thing that really has shocked me and that we've had to be prepared to deal with is that sometimes the physical trauma that we have people in the hospital, auto accidents, we have falls, we have assaults. You can read about these things in our community. So it's really important that they tell their story, not only because of their current physical trauma, but it often brings up trauma from their history because they're vulnerable at this time and it takes them back into other experiences they've had. I also get to utilize, the hospital is not an appropriate setting for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. We don't have the time to do the reprocessing piece, so it would not be ethical to implement that, but we do have the time to do a piece of that training. And what's been research is being done is called acute trauma incident processing, or we call it ATIP. And so it combines mindfulness, eye movements, and relaxation breathing along with cognitive restructuring to try to help bring the client's distress down. And one thing that I really liked in the book that brought us together, if you want to follow along, if you have your book on page 205, it says trauma robs you of the feeling that you are in charge of yourself, of what I will call self-leadership. The challenge of recovery is to reestablish ownership of your body and your mind, of yourself. For most people, this involves, one, finding a way to become calm and focused. And I really think that's what ATIP helps my clients, the clients I work with do, is to regain some of that control and decrease a lot of that distress that they're experiencing. And then somebody already said that what I really have learned by ACEs training is to get them to engage, to get them to talk about their needs. I don't focus on the whys of what happened, but just by asking the simple question, what happened to you? And often you would think they want to just tell me about their accident or their fall or their relationship that led to an assault, but often they go back in time and tell me about other things that have happened. So it's a way for them to engage and be able to express some of their concerns. You want to hear about challenges, Becky? So this is another interesting part. I want to refer back to the book. So I was talking to Becky and I was saying that part of the challenge is being in a hospital itself. That can be kind of traumatizing. If anybody's been in a hospital, you're not feeling well, you're in a strange place, you have a whole lot of people in and out of your room all the time. So it's quite distressing. And I thought Dr. V did a nice job kind of putting together what I was experiencing on page 212. He says, after an acute trauma, like an assault, accident, or natural disaster, survivors require the presence of familiar people, faces and voices, physical contact, food, shelter, and a safe place, and a time to sleep. It is critical to communicate with loved ones close and far, and to reunite as soon as possible with family and friends in a place that feels safe. Our attachment bonds are our greatest protection against threat. And I think this is really challenging in a hospital environment because there's a lot of work to do, a lot that needs to happen, and even COVID has interfered with this immensely when we had no visitors, have a limitation on visitors. I deal a lot with patients who have children who at one time could have met with our child life specialist or had other services to help in that way that have been hindered. So I would say that the hospital environment, we try our best to be therapeutic and quiet, but we're not family and we are strangers. And as Dr. V mentions, they need their family at this time. So when COVID's over, I'm glad they'll be able to come back and support my patients. Did that do it?
Yeah, that was great, Cindy. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think you covered a lot of ground, very, very interesting information. So, and that is a tough thing about COVID is that the things that our priorities for the physical health, like are difficult to integrate with what we know about what's best for kind of that mental and emotional healing too. So on that, now I do want to have a chance to talk to Robin Vita, who is director with our St. Joseph County Public Health Department. And so Robin, all right, Robin, can you tell us, tell us how the knowledge of the impact of childhood trauma informs the work you do in public health? And along with that, if you're seeing any shifts in the public's understanding of trauma too.
Yes, thank you. Everyone can hear me okay? I'm home, as you can see, so forgive any screams you hear from my small children. They're fine. They're fine. A lot is, and really, I think when we think around the knowledge we have created around adversity in trauma, really has lent its lens to public health, specifically as a true discovery of root cause. I think it helps us identify, at least in a public health setting, maybe why a lot of our midstream type interventions or programs that are developed to mitigate poor health outcomes a lot of the times don't work as well as we think they should. And I think it's because we don't go far enough back to address and acknowledge trauma and adversity that has occurred has ultimately led to some of the coping mechanisms and behaviors that lead to poor health outcomes. And we at the department, I think are extremely, even though I was one of the original master trainers almost 6 years ago, we're still really in our infancy in finding where a local Department of Health that's largely used to service individuals with immunizations and more code enforcement type things really sit when we look at addressing these really large community and in cultural and in culture, not just in relation to race, but just cultural in terms of community issues that trauma has. The shift we have seen, and really it informs a lot of our outreach work. We have recently just hired a full-time social worker at the Department of Health. She literally started yesterday. We have 2 community health workers that will be coming on board here in the next week or so. We have a Notre Dame fellow who's actually on the call tonight, working specifically on looking at the role the Department of Health plays in prevention and in mitigation of ACEs. It's not just a shift in community thinking. It's a shift in, I think, public health thinking, specifically when you have all of these other compounding things. And even tonight, like I was trying to prep with this, and I'm extremely passionate around adversity and childhood development and those types of things, but my mind is so foggy just from all the COVID things that I go through each and every hour of the day, it seems. So I'm excited. We'll talk a little bit about that later, but I think really it's, in terms of community, there is, oh my gosh, you guys, you can, yep, good. We see that it's, our organizations have this lens of trauma awareness, and even to Kimberly's mention around that, even some have made that leap to more trauma-informed care and trauma responsiveness. For us still, at a larger scale community level, we get a lot more people saying, I think I might have heard about that. But I think there's still a great need to validate experiences individuals have gone through and then help them work through that before we can truly begin to work through and see truer change. But at the organizational level, we've seen that just over the course of 2 years with me at the department and other organizations that normally would not have talked about trauma. We can see that now that's becoming a priority, and finding our way to help them is exciting.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So, and I agree, you know, that sometimes when the people who are doing this work and we think, okay, we want to be moving that needle forward, and sometimes it's hard to see the growth and the progress that's been made, but I know I personally really benefited from preparing for this and talking to the and just seeing how much work has been done. And then I listened to you, Robin, I'm like, and thank goodness for these years behind us, because we do know there's so much now that we didn't see coming, so much additional trauma due to the impacts of COVID that are ahead of us yet. So thank goodness we do have so many in the community who are engaged, and that we've gotten as far as we have and done so much of there's beginning stages, you know, so.
Most definitely.
Yeah, so thank you. Okay, I have another question for Kim, just quickly. I know we talked a little bit about this for Kim Neff, but the book talks some about, and it's come up tonight, EMDR. And Cindy shared that's not something that really works in a hospital setting, but is that something that is offered for anyone through Oaklawn?
Absolutely. On the adult side of services, we do have staff trained in EMDR. It is a great model for processing through trauma. It's not the only model in the adult world. There's also Seeking Safety and some other great trauma models. We also have that available as an option in our child and adolescent world. At our South Bend campus, we currently have 3 staff that are trained in EMDR. It would not be the first recommendation for trauma therapy. There are other models that we offer, trauma-focused cognitive behavior therapy, parent-child interaction therapy, and child-parent psychotherapy. And so how to know if EMDR or any of the other treatment models are most appropriate would be done through a process of contacting Access Center, having an assessment done, a thorough assessment that would include, you know, trauma history, the adverse childhood experiences, other trauma tools, and through that process of intake and ongoing assessment, identifying what would be the best model of therapy for the individual, because it's going to depend on, you know, the trauma, the current presentation of symptoms, the level of impairment that the person may be suffering from the trauma. And so all those are taken into consideration, and then together deciding what would be the most appropriate path.
Okay, thanks. And the field's continuing to develop, right? And so that's what you said. Yeah. I don't know. You guys, I don't have sight. I know, Cindy, you have your book there. I don't know what year this book was written. It's escaping me now, but but we know, again, it's still incredibly very relevant and things, but we're just continuing to learn more as time passes. So about best treatment and what works best for who and stuff. So, okay, good. Thank you.
It's like 2014, Becky.
2014, yep.
Perfect. Okay, thank you so much. All right. I have another question. We're about done with our panel, but want to ask Stephanie a little bit. So Stephanie and I talked earlier this afternoon, and kind of e-learning and e-learning that's happening because of COVID and the impact that's having on young people's mental health has come up. And so again, things are evolving continually. But Stephanie, can you share a little bit about how e-learning appears to be impacting students' mental health, and then your team at South Bend Community School Corporation, their ability to support the kids' emotional wellness while they're at home?
So there's lots going on with that. When we kind of look at, we're all social beings, and so kids having that opportunity to connect with each other, it is a challenge. I think in our student contacts for the social workers, we have over 761 contacts that social workers have made either virtually or just by working with their staff to be able to do home visits to make sure that students are logging on. It does have an incredible impact, because when we think of this from a, not just a trauma responsive, but also a culturally responsive lens as well, we kind of look at things from the sense that not everybody is responding to this type of information in the same way. So how do we bridge that gap? We know that we have the digital divide, and so we've done that with how we provide internet services and hotspots to students, but how are we bridging that gap with as far as those mental health services for children? If you've watched the news, you know that we lost 2 children back to back at the same school. That was really tough to kind of process through, but we were able to do that in a virtual setting. But we had to be more intentional about how we address the needs of those students. And so we're not looking at it from, okay, that happened a month ago, so now that kids are coming back into school and going into that space and not seeing their schoolmates, how are we going to be forward thinking and address those things now? And so we're working with some local service providers, also with Nicole Williams, who does the drumming, with the social worker in that building, to kind of create a space for students to be able to acknowledge those losses in a way that makes sense to them. But all of this information and how we meet the needs of all students always has to be looked at from this perspective of not everybody looks at mental health in the same way. And so how are we being intentional about addressing those needs and being supportive of those individuals who don't necessarily embrace it the way that we might? So how do we create those spaces? And so we've been working really hard to be able to prepare not only our social workers, but hopefully, prepare our classrooms to not just be trauma informed or trauma responsive, but also be culturally responsive as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So we're about finished with the panel, but just, I guess on that note, and I guess I'll tell our attendees that our remaining 2 weeks, we're gonna be talking more and more about kind of individual responses and what people can do to support. But I would just like to ask our panelists, not to put you on the spot, I didn't send this question ahead of time, but are there things community members can do to support the work you are doing? The work with trauma, the work with trauma related to COVID. Does anything come to mind? What are things, and if so, and I know I just put you on the spot with that, but anyone have anything they want to share about that?
I think as we continue our work with students, to really keep in mind all of the things that children go through, to not look at it from that missionary perspective of top down, how can I pull you out of the place you're at, but how can I walk with you where you're at? And really kind of look at it from that culturally responsive lens, because what works for you may not work for everyone else. When we think of our privileges, so we come from privilege when we have families, when we're educated, when our lives are different, to reflect on what your own personal privileges are, and then kind of create the space for you to understand your own biases. So as we are walking through this process of having a better understanding of trauma and its impact on our community, really taking note of those things that kind of motivate you and be willing to listen more than to talk. and walk alongside individuals and just meet them where they are, and understand their needs from their lens and not your own.
Yeah, I want to echo Stephanie's, everything you have said, Stephanie. You are, and I think just not, and yeah, like be nice, be kind, be patient. I think a lot of times we need to validate and yeah, listen, right? Listen and not respond.
And I'll piggyback off of that as well. I think people in our community, whether it be at a school or a business, whatever it might be, to be part of the, not part of the problem, but part of the solution, to be part of the process of helping to make change. You know, in the trauma-informed world, there's a lot of things that just say, you know, all it takes is one person to help foster that, that change, foster that resilience. And so if we can keep that in mind, you know, kids that have a sense of belonging, it may not be to their own family, but it could be an attachment to a teacher, an attachment to a foster parent, or a youth group leader. You know, all of that can have such a powerful effect. These families and kids need a sense of belonging, a sense of community, a sense of purpose. And so the more that we can help foster that and validate their strengths, their feelings, that can go so far in the healing process.
Also from the medical side, if you can just stay safe, follow the COVID precautions so that we can get people back visiting their loved ones in hospitals and nursing facilities and try to get ahead of this virus, because as I mentioned previously, the author says that's what's needed for healing.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And that is, again, the powerful message in the book is, as you know, on the one hand is how much harm people can cause, but on the other hand, the beautiful part is how much healing people can help with too, or how much, you know, how powerful love and caring is. So thank you so much to all of our panelists. I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah now. And again, we just really appreciate all of you being here and sharing that. And thank you so much for the work you're doing in our community.
Yes, thank you. That was really interesting to hear from so many different angles, how we are dealing with trauma in our community. So now we're going to go into breakout rooms for a small group discussion. We have 2 questions. I'm going to send here a link to a doc. So if you want to open up the doc with the questions, you'll have it. And the first question for the breakout group is, can you think of a time in our community when you saw someone respond really well to a person who was upset? So their response appeared to be trauma responsive, whether they knew it or not. So please share what you remember about this. So there's that first question. The second one, if you get to it, or you could start with this one. Can you think of a time in our community when you saw someone respond to a person who was upset in a way that only made them more upset? And what might have been done differently to help that person? So there are the questions in the chat, and I'm going to put us into breakout rooms. Becky, how long do you want us to be in breakout rooms?
I think, okay, it's 6:56. So if we go for 10 minutes, that'll give us a little bit of nice time for closure. I think hopefully we can do it in 10 minutes. Sound good?
Yeah.
Okay.
So at 9 minutes, there'll be a warning comes up that says you have 60 seconds left in your breakout room. And I'm just checking these to make sure we don't have a lot of presenters in one room, because that might throw us off. Okay, so you'll now see the message, and please click that to move into your breakout room. All right, it looks like everyone should be back. Thank you. Would anyone like to share what experience you talked about in your group, or something that someone else shared that you thought was interesting? So you can unmute yourself and just speak up, or you could put it in the chat. It looks like some of our panelists are still here. Cindy is still here. Robin is here. If you had any questions for the panelists also, Kimberly and Becky are still here.
Well, I don't want to do all the talking, but in our breakout room, we had a South Bend Community School Corporation employee who told us about another great social emotional learning initiative they did at Adams. And so that was great to hear about. So we didn't quite get to the question, but we're like, hey, we're engaged, and this is what these breakout rooms are for, to be able to learn this stuff. So it's a really valuable use of time and a very positive kind of school-wide social emotional learning initiative that has been successful and helpful. So
yeah, and I was in that breakout room. I was just super impressed by the deployment model seems to be effective, which was really, and Megan, if you want to like speak to that, but that like, you know, all the teachers, yeah, Megan, you're the one that does it.
I know, but like my bosses are on this call. So I was saying, like, we got word from the district that we had to do this social emotional learning. And I'm going to fully be honest, I wasn't excited about it. And I didn't think it was going to go super well, but we had a team at Adams, and the team developed these lessons and they sent them out to us. And it was like, we would do one lesson with our first period, and then another lesson with our second period, and then third, and so on and so forth. And it worked really, really well. It was, the lessons were really well developed, really well thought out. And the first week was a little chaotic because we only had a few days to plan it, and so it wasn't super great. But as we've moved on, these lessons have been like really nice PowerPoints with details, like videos, discussions, and then also like possible answers, so that teachers who maybe don't have the expertise will still be able to engage. And the cool thing for me, like, I teach English, so these are conversations I have just every day with my students, but the cool thing was knowing that my students were having these conversations in all of their classes, so that I knew what they were talking about, so that if I taught the lesson in my first period, I knew my sixth period students had the same lesson, even if they hadn't had it with me, so I can use that language and feel confident they all have that same language. So it was a really cool initiative that has worked out really well at Adams.
Well, Megan, I'm really happy to hear that.
Hey, Tessa.
Hey there.
Thank you for sharing that. Does anyone else have anything you want to share from your breakout room?
Yeah, Sarah,
okay.
In our group, some of the things that came up were understanding that not everybody's in the same place, being culturally responsive, and that often a willingness to help, demonstrating that by saying things like, how may I help you, and using a soft voice and approaching in a way that doesn't seem confrontational.
Yeah, like in a professional, like when you're working, talking to people that you don't know, or are you just in everyday life?
I think mostly either with students or in the public arena.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And sometimes you just have to let people vent for a while and, not try to calm them down right away, but, let them get it out. And then, you've demonstrated a willingness to listen, and perhaps you can move toward some sort of resolution.
I think we know that pretty well working at the library. At the library, we often get people who sometimes you feel like, let's just get to your question. Can I help you with your question? But it goes a lot better when you realize that if you just let them talk, say all their things that are unrelated to their question, they will get to the question, and then you can help them. If you try to jump in, you're never going to find out what their actual question is. So yeah.
Go slow to go far.
I bet I bet everybody on this call can think of some example from their work or personal world that is exactly that, right?
But we've never been that way.
Never. one thing I would like to just offer, I think all of the panelists, thank you guys so much for giving up part of your evening to participate. Yeah, really, thank you. And like, I think so many people touched on, in all of these different worlds, it seems like, right, the commonality is just showing up, right? Like taking the time to show up, and it looks different in different spaces and in different professions and stuff, but I think especially now in 2020, right? Like we can all do a better job just showing up for the people, and they don't have to be our people, right? Like, I think that's where the power in this conversation really comes from, is that most of us are probably pretty good at showing up for our people, but if we all show up better for like all people, right? Like any people, right? I think that's where really, like, I'm so impressed by, even I've only been in the community, it'll be almost 6 years, which feels like I might be here for a long time. But just the changes, we were talking in our breakout room too, just about the growth and the momentum that we've had, right? That we've really come a really, really long way. And awareness really is the first step, because it allows the opportunity for a different conversation. And so how can we kind of capture that and keep that momentum going, in kind of introducing the opportunity to have a different conversation that allows kind of more evidence-based, I don't want to be like all sciencey, but like evidence-based problem solving, or like, look to the needs of the human system. Stephanie mentioned that it's not a rotten kid. Like 9 times out of 10, there's something going on for that child. And understanding, having awareness of the impact of trauma or stress dose during childhood allows us then to make a different choice in how we engage. I just think that that's such an important piece. Yeah, thanks.
Thing I wanted to add is oftentimes it's really about ourselves more than it is about someone else, and our ability to navigate difference, and our ability to really allow the square edges to become rounded, so that we are more agile and can really, quote unquote, become a global citizen, so to speak. Because what's our ability to interact here as well as to interact there or over there? It's really about personal leadership and our ability to just encompass all of these different types of styles, not so more the other person. And I just, I guess I can pose that as a question. Is it more about ourselves rather than other people, and how we have the ability to move along the scale?
And I know we're up on time, but I think, I can't remember which panelist mentioned this, but I think a point that really heartens me too is we don't have to wait for it to come from top down. That some of the things we shared tonight, organizations have a role, administrations have a role in doing that, but individual responses, and starting with awareness is where it starts. But just as an individual who works in any of these settings or whatever settings we work in, we all can really, again, either kind of make it be part of the solution or part of the problem, and so we don't have to wait for somebody to say, we're going to change this. We can change the way we interact with people and make an impact in our own little ripple effect. So.
And it doesn't, not just organizations, right? Like, it's the way you show up at the grocery store, and the way that you get gas, and the way, right? Like all of these things.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I totally would agree with, support Tessa's question, that like, sorry, Dr. Sutton's question, that it is, all right. I think so much of this transformation is about a personal transformation, about the way that we choose to be different because of what we understand. And especially, I don't remember who it was, maybe Stephanie at some point on the call, right? Like, we often talk about privilege in the context of race, particularly right now with renewed fight against racism, but privilege in the context of trauma can not only be about race, but it can be like having a family. Oh my gosh, right? Like, having somebody that you can reliably go to is a privilege, right? And so how do those of us with privilege become better citizens, global citizens and community citizens, not just in our workplaces, but everywhere we go?
That seems like a great way to wrap up. Thank you, Dr. Michael. So, Becky, any closing comments you would like to make?
No, I think we're good. I think,
Right.
Thank you everybody for giving us your evening, for caring to be here. So thank you.
And speaking of things we can personally do, our session next week will be about ways to get involved in the community, some more kind of informal community organizations that are doing work like yoga, theater, even massage. So I hope that you can make it back 6 o'clock, same Zoom, and have a wonderful night. Thank you so much for joining us.